Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 166. Step 1. Apologize and mean it. Having more of an advance notice that All Might was going to be coming over to talk didn't help his nerves in the slightest. It had been exactly a week since they had last met like this, and Izuku had processed approximately none of that so far. He'd been too caught up in ignoring it, then helping his friend study, then ignoring it some more, then taking finals. And well, his allotted ignoring it time had ended. All Might still hadn't made any attempt to talk to him, and that was probably for the best. He'd shouted at him 3 times now, and that wasn't a track record he was proud of. He hoped the preparation time was enough to steel himself. He didn't like being angry. It was 8:26 a.m., and All Might was going to be here at 9, just like he was last week. He could already hear Mike and Eraser shuffling around in the dining room. They were probably eating breakfast. Mike had popped in and asked if he wanted any earlier, but he had declined because his stomach was doing backflips, and he didn't think rocking the boat was a good idea. 34 minutes. He just had to wait 34 minutes, and then another unknown length of time, and then it would be over, and everything would be back to normal. He let out a heavy sigh. He wasn't delusional enough to be an optimist. Minute after painful minute ticked past, and after an eon, the time came. He heard the buzzer sound off from the Genkan, and he stood like a man walking to the gallows. He could hear Mike at the door offering tea and a pair of guest slippers that were certainly much too small for All Might. Both offers were politely declined. Eraser was putting the dishes from breakfast into the dishwasher. Their eyes met when Izuku's movement must have caught his attention, and he gave him the same look he used to give them as Ivy before they charged head first into a squabble. It was a look that said, "We've got this." It was something he hadn't expected and something he didn't even realize he had missed. He nodded back at him and took his usual seat at the table. Eraser wasn't slow to join him, but All Might and Mike took their time murmuring in the Genkan. He couldn't tell what they were talking about because they stopped before they made their way over. Izuku was surprised to see that All Might chose to sit next to Mike rather than next to him. He'd been under the impression that the two of them were on much worse terms after last week than Izuku was, but apparently the stunt he pulled during the finals tipped the balance. He did his best to think nothing of it in the awkward silence that followed once the chairs stopped shuffling. "I would like to start, if that's all right." All Might broke the silence before anyone else got the chance. Eraser, who had already been glaring at him, lifted his eyebrow in accession, though it looked more like a challenge than anything. No one missed the thump of Mike kicking him under the table, and Izuku allowed himself to snort out a laugh at that. Things were already tense enough, and there was something about bullying Eraser that was always funny. All Might and Mike both smiled at his amusement, and Eraser narrowed his eyes at him in a way that was meant to be threatening, but just made him laugh again. "God, you're both children. Yagi, please continue." Mike interrupted with a poorly hidden smile and gave All Might the floor. Thank you. I need to apologize, though I already know you don't want to hear it. I never should have said what I said to you, my boy. It was cruel. I was projecting my own shortcomings onto you, even though we had hardly met. It was shameful. I had no right to judge you. You didn't need me to get into UA. You are a hero at heart. Nothing can get in the way of that. You didn't need a quirk to prove that to me, either. I should have said that before, and I'm sorry that I didn't." He started, his voice already thick with emotion. He had a feeling All Might only paused to take a breath, but Izuku held his hand up to stop him before he started up again. That was a lot. More than enough already. He was an adult. They were equals. Pretending that was true would make this conversation much easier to bear. Being a sniveling, stuttering, self-deprecating mess through this wasn't going to help anyone. Deep breath in. You are an adult. Deep breath out. I would have been dead at the USJ without you. Not just because of One for All. Training with you in Gran Torino was the only thing that kept that thing from tearing me apart immediately. He countered as calmly as he could manage. He saw the way all three of them grimaced at that response, but it was true. That doesn't mean something I said thoughtlessly a year prior was warranted. I made a name for myself as a symbol, as someone who encouraged the people. I am, the face of heroics, and I told you that you couldn't do it. I took your dream and crushed it with no context other than outdated prejudice. It wasn't right. Izuku bit his lip and tried to find another denial, but he could tell that All Might had thought about this conversation far more than he had. There wasn't likely to be a single logical argument that he wouldn't shoot down outright. You weren't wrong. Just because it wasn't right doesn't mean it was wrong, he insisted quietly with his gaze, following the patterns of the wood grain on the table. I think we both know that, he added with a little more conviction, forcing himself to meet All Might's eyes. The fact that All Might didn't argue said it all. The silence was deafening, so he let his focus drop back down to the table. He could hear Eraser taking measured breaths and trying to tamp down his anger, but he ignored it. What do you mean by that, kiddo? Mike spoke up after a moment. He looked over to All Might before Mike. His brows were drawn and his expression was sad. All Might knew what he was talking about. There was no room in this world for a quirkless hero. Mike was focused on him and ignoring All Might's discomfort, though, so he cleared his throat in an attempt to dispel the lump that had made itself a home there before he spoke. The world doesn't want a quirkless hero. Even if I did make it, I would be fighting the people as much as I would be fighting villains. It's just not worth it, he explained lamely. The industry would never accept you. Eraser spoke up, quoting the words they had said to him as Ivy last year on that rooftop. Yeah, he agreed solemnly. Damn it, kid. Eraser cursed under his breath as he rubbed a hand across the stubble on his face. Izuku knew he was cursing the situation and not him, but he still didn't know how to respond to that. There wasn't much to say, after all. He was quirkless, and the world didn't like that. He doubted that even All Might had the power to sway public opinion. He had hoped for it as a child, like all kids do, hoped that All Might would save him, but he knew better now. If he tried, all he'd succeed in doing is dragging his name through the mud. It wasn't worth fighting. It never had been, and it never will be. He'd come to terms with that. I think that's an issue we need more time to discuss. Yagi, did you have more to say? Mike took the reins of the conversation again and passed them off. All Might let out a bitter laugh before he continued. Yes, I'm afraid there's quite a long list of things I need to apologize for. I don't want to hear it. Izuku cut him off before he started up again. God, what was his problem? He shoved his face into his hands so he couldn't open his stupid mouth and shove his stupid foot any further down his own stupid throat. I know you don't want to, but I think you need to, kiddo, Mike answered. He let out a muffled apology through his hands, which went ignored by everyone. The silence went on until he grew enough of a spine to show his face again. Mike was smiling at him. Eraser was watching him with a practiced, blank expression, and All Might seemed to be forcing himself to look at Izuku as much as Izuku was forcing himself to look at him. No one wanted to do this. Why couldn't they just not? He knew that suggestion would just lead to another lecture, so he didn't bother voicing it. I wanted to keep you safe. I thought that the fewer people who knew the truth about One for All, the fewer potential leaks there would be. but in reality, all it did was isolate you even more than you already were. I didn't realize how isolated I'd been. Well, that's not entirely true, but I didn't realize how much it had affected me until I got to know you. I was setting you up for a life like that, and, well, it doesn't bear thinking about. We're stronger together. You taught me that. I'm sorry that I tried to take that away from you. All Might apologized again. Izuku didn't try to argue this time. He knew it wasn't worth it. And I'm sorry that I ignored all of the signs of what you were going through. I should have known better. Please, just don't. You didn't know because I didn't let you. All of you, I wasn't waiting around for someone to save me. He trailed off with a frustrated sigh, not really knowing how to say what he wanted to say. And he had cut All Might off again. Frickin' hell. You worked hard so that no one would know about your situation, and when we apologize for it, it dismisses that work. It feels demeaning. Is that what you're trying to say? Mike asked. Yeah, he agreed, a little dumbfounded by how squarely they hit the nail on the head. That makes sense. That's valid, Mike replied. The room fell into contemplative silence after that. And you didn't do nothing, All Might. I haven't been hungry since you started buying me food, Izuku admitted quietly, hoping to ease his obvious guilt. The comment didn't seem to make anyone feel better. Everyone's expression soured at the reminder of how things used to be. He should have just kept his mouth shut. However, he did note that Eraser stopped glaring at All Might for a moment as he turned his head down in shame. It wasn't the emotion Izuku would have liked to replace his anger with, but it was something, he supposed. The room once again fell into silence that he didn't know how to fill. He was too tense to even think about anything other than how oppressive the absence of noise could be. Well, if it makes you feel any better, Nedzu called you dangerously intelligent for being able to slip under his radar for so long. Eraser brought the conversation back with an attempt at levity. Izuku could feel his face heating up as a look of wide-eyed shock fell over his expression. Eraser was getting back at him for laughing at him earlier. Part of him missed this kind of banter that they used to have, but the louder part of him was far too embarrassed by the phrase to relish in it. This wasn't any better than the silence. He did not, Izuku insisted, words once again muffled by his hands covering his face. He did. He's trying to get his grubby little paws on you for an internship. Tried to take you out of English, but I put my foot down. Eraser continued. All Might let out a poor facsimile of his trademark laugh, but Izuku could tell it was still genuine, just weighed down by other emotions. The smile on his face was telling. He said the same thing to me, All Might explained when he realized his bark of laughter had caught everyone's attention. Izuku wanted to curl up in a ball and fade out of existence. There was no way Nedzu said that about him. There was just no way. Well, kiddo, there's no shortage of people who think you're remarkable, but I think for the sake of your blood pressure, we should move on. Mike saved him. Yes, I think I've said enough for today, All Might replied, and Izuku had to stifle the sigh of relief pressing against his ribs. My turn, then. Eraser spoke up instead. The stifled sigh of relief turned into a stifled groan. I have to apologize to both of you, I suppose. I already spoke with Izuku, but it bears repeating. I said things that I shouldn't have last week. It was needlessly hurtful, and it was not my place to say any of it. I'm sorry, Yagi. Eraser spoke like he had a gun to his head. He looked a bit like a little kid whose mom was forcing him to apologize. Izuku would have laughed at the absurdity if it weren't for the subject matter. I really don't think that's necessary, Aizawa. All Might tried to deny, but Eraser cut him off. No, it was childish and rash. It was a breach of Izuku's privacy, and it served no other purpose than to hurt you. I shouldn't have said it. Eraser countered with more conviction this time. All Might opened his mouth to say something, but seemingly thought better of it and simply nodded. That being said, we've gotten clearance to give you an explanation, Eraser said and turned his attention back to Izuku. He knew that this was coming. He had told them he was going to tell All Might everything. But now that the time had come, he was paralyzed. Mike seemed to catch onto his hesitation. You can change your mind. We don't need to talk about it. They offered him an out. No, I should. I need to. I don't want to lie anymore. All right, that's okay. I understand. Whenever you're ready, we'll back you up if you need it, they assured. Eraser gave him a stiff smile, whereas Mike's was more sad. They were both reassuring in their own ways. I was a vigilante for 3 years, he forced himself to stutter out. All Might's face morphed from shock to concern until a smile slowly crept over his expression, one as blindingly brilliant as it was on TV, if not more so. He threw his head back with a booming laugh that probably gave the soundproofed wall a run for their money. He laughed and laughed until he had to hold a handkerchief up to his mouth because the rough treatment became too much for his remaining battered lung, and he kept on laughing. Izuku rushed to the kitchen to get him a glass of water faster than anyone could even blink. All Might patted him on the shoulder as he handed it over. He seemed completely unbothered by the blood covering his teeth and handkerchief. He wished this wasn't something All Might had been desensitized to. He deserved better. Mike had an awkward smile on his face, like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to laugh or not, and Eraser just looked confused. Oh, my boy. Of course you were. Thank you. All Might responded once he finally got his laughter under control enough to take a drink of the water. So you're not, mad or... He trailed off as he settled back into his seat across the table. That would be more than a little hypocritical of me. I didn't always have a license, but the world was a different place when I was a boy. I didn't make a practice of standing idle and watching. I didn't have much of anyone looking out for me either. Not until I met Nana, my predecessor. I had my wild years, but you didn't hear that from me. All Might explained with a wink. What? You said your parents... I thought... He stuttered out incomplete sentences. All Might smiled, turned sad, and he looked over to Mike for some sort of reassurance before he continued speaking. What was that about? He thought passively. My family died when I was quite young. Got caught up in an attack. It was so long ago I hardly remember. I was 10 or 11, I think. Well, that doesn't really matter. I grew up in a rather disorganized group home. Sometimes there was a bed for me, and sometimes there wasn't. That's why I did see the signs. I just ignored them. Wishful thinking, I suppose. I'd hoped things had gotten better. I didn't want to face the facts that they hadn't, All Might divulged. Mike's out-of-place laugh pulled Izuku out of his stunned silence. Sorry, you two are remarkably similar. It's almost uncanny, they explained. He knew he instantly had a blush on his cheeks, but he was surprised to look over at All Might and see the same ruddy pink color on his face, too. Maybe Mike had a point, but he could only hope to live up to All Might's legacy. Eraser cleared his throat and brought the group's attention back. I worked alongside him for 2 of those 3 years. Detective Tsukashi brought me in on his case, and had me keep an eye on him. That's how I found out in the first place. I had my suspicions after the semester started, but thought they were too absurd to be true. Eraser finished his explanation. You're the vigilante now Masa was talking about? All Might turned back to him, and the blush that he had hoped would start to recede came back with a vengeance. Unless he's hiding more vigilantes up his sleeve, then yes, I would assume so. Eraser answered for him, while Izuku did his best impression of an ostrich sticking their head in the sand. Ha ha! He told me he owes you his promotion. All Might laughed again. The temptation to melt through the floor was undeniable. Luckily, he was saved by his physical inability to do so. Geez, are you two trying to permanently turn him into a strawberry? Give the kid a break. Yagi, do you want to tell him what you told me? Mike reined them back in. Ah, yes. All Might started as if he had forgotten what Mike was talking about for a moment. This has all been an eye-opening experience, a wake-up call, perhaps 30 years too late, I'm afraid. I had a chat with Yamada, and I think it's well past time for me to talk about all of this, the past, and I'm near retirement. It seems a good time for introspection. I'm going to have my team vet a few psychologists, Mike corrected. See, I don't even know the difference. Anyway, they're going to find some trustworthy people, and Yamada said that might be something that could help you as well. I'll pass on the list once I get it. I'm sure you have a lot to talk about. We both do, don't we? All Might finished his statement with an awkward laugh and lifted a hand up to scratch at the back of his neck, the way he always did when he was nervous. Izuku didn't know what to say. Hell, he didn't even know what to think. But Eraser had that look on his face that he had whenever they had done something clever when he was mad at them. Reluctant pride. It was a face he hadn't seen in a while, but now it was pointed at All Might. That was a good sign for their relationship, at least. Unfortunately for him, he was left with nowhere else to run. They were going to make him talk to someone. Actually talk to someone. He'd been putting off looking at the list Mike had given him for weeks. But now that the semester was pretty much over, he had a feeling they wouldn't be so lenient, especially with whatever list All Might was compiling. All Might was going to therapy? What? You all right, kiddo? Mike asked gently. Yeah, he answered as unconvincingly as possible. Thankfully, Eraser knew him well enough to shift the group's focus away while he collected his thoughts. Yagi, were you quirkless? Eraser asked rather abruptly. I was, yes, and I will be again soon. The last embers of the torch I held are fading more each day. I couldn't have any more faith in who holds that torch now, though. All Might replied with a sad smile. Eraser's focus shifted between each of them, and so did Izuku's, but it seemed that no one knew where he was going with this. There is a massive hole in my education. Eraser started to explain apropos of nothing. Not once did we discuss the laws and ethics surrounding quirkless individuals. Perhaps that has changed now, but I doubt it. I'd like to assume it wasn't out of malice, as social trends and power dynamics have been shifting faster than academia can really keep up with for the last 30 years. But that's not an excuse. Nothing is going to change if no one does anything about it. I've done extensive research over the past few weeks, as much as I could, at least, as there are very few studies into quirkless people in Japan or Asia as a whole. But I digress. We are in the position to bring that change, and I would like to start with my class, if you're amenable, Izuku. What? He replied dumbly. I want to present my research to your peers. I don't want them to become the kind of adults who neglected you. You aren't the only quirkless kid, and given that I was as clueless as I was to this issue, I can only assume I'm not the only one. I didn't want to blindside you with the lecture. And with both of you having an insider's perspective, I figured it would be helpful to run it past you first. Eraser explained. When Izuku gained enough wherewithal to stop staring blankly, he looked over at the other two. Mike was looking at Eraser with such blatant adoration that it was honestly a little nauseating. And All Might was looking at him just as stunned and impatient for Izuku's reaction as Izuku was for his. When it was clear that he wasn't going to stop mentally buffering anytime soon, All Might spoke up. You're not wrong about the past 30 years. I don't know how much of a fresh perspective I can give, but yes, of course, I'll do whatever I can. Again, the group's focus shifted back to him, and he was too dumbfounded to disagree. The preceding half an hour was spent listening to Eraser's findings after combing through several years' worth of police reports on hate crimes, obituaries, and minimal studies he could find on quirkless people in Japan. There was more information than Izuku knew what to do with, and he didn't know how he could have ever thought that Eraser would have turned his back on him before. He knew Eraser was a good man, but he didn't have the words. Damn, are you going to try and get that published, babe? Mike was the first to speak. I was thinking about it. I'd have to come up with a pseudonym, but that's an issue for another time. He dismissed them and turned his attention toward Izuku. I had no idea about any of... Wow. All Might spoke up, his voice once again thick with emotion. The statistics Eraser had presented were grim. He's sure he would be feeling the same grief All Might was once he got the chance to feel anything but overwhelmed. That amount of research must have taken weeks of non-stop work in every single second of free time that he had. Izuku had noticed him sitting at the dining table on his computer fairly often in the past few weeks, but he had assumed he'd been doing preparations for the finals. Not this. He was biting down on his lips to keep himself from staring slack-jawed, and a sudden twinge of pain clued him into the fact that his lips were trembling. He could taste blood from where his jaw had spasmed and his canine had split his skin, but he didn't move a muscle. He couldn't. The second he moved, he knew it was going to fall to pieces. The effort to avoid it was in vain, but he didn't know what else to do. Tears started trailing down his cheeks unbidden, and he ignored that as well. My boy, All Might cooed sympathetically as he stood from his seat. No one said anything as he walked over to Izuku's side of the table. The dam that Izuku knew would break shattered the moment All Might knelt down and pulled him into his arms. He cried against his chest like a child, and All Might just pet his hair and let him. So much for acting like an adult, he thought bitterly. He didn't know how to handle all of this, both that he wasn't the only one like this, and that people actually cared enough. Eraser actually cared enough to do anything about it. There was no way he could ever string together words to communicate what was going through his mind right now, and he was already making a fool of himself, so he figured he had nothing to lose. He pried himself out of All Might's embrace, shuffled around the table, and wrapped his arms around Eraser hard enough that he heard the man's breath leave his lungs in a huff. He didn't pull away, though. He just hugged back as good as he got, hard enough that Izuku could hear his bad elbow pop. They were both breathless, and he was laughing and crying at the same time. It was ridiculous. He felt ridiculous, so he did his best to pull himself together quickly. He pulled himself away from Eraser as swiftly as he had latched himself to him and returned to his seat. All Might was sitting sideways in the seat next to his, and Mike once again had a sad smile on his face. I think I'll just let you two go over my notes in your own time. I'd like to present this on Monday with the final results, if possible. The sooner the better. Eraser graciously ignored his meltdown. Izuku just nodded and listened absently as All Might talked about publishers or something. Mike caught his eye from across the table and gave him a double thumbs up before pointing one thumb at Eraser and the other at All Might as they had a civilized conversation. Izuku smiled, a little wobbly, as he looked between the three of them. It was nice to see his worlds collide in a less destructive context. End of chapter.